Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Nason, APAC Assistant Director for Policy and Government Affairs. Thank you for joining us today for this timely conversation. In recent days, we've seen a significant uptick in tensions on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. The IDF has intercepted a number of hostile drones fired by Hezbollah terrorists towards Israel's offshore gas rigs. And the U.S. has been actively involved in brokering talks between Israel and the Lebanese government over their maritime border. Here to help make sense of these latest dynamics is IDF reservist Captain Ilan Shulman. Ilan is an expert on the geopolitical situation in Lebanon and Syria and served in the IDF paratroopers unit as company commander. He is a frequent speaker on AIEF educational seminars in Israel, where members of Congress and other leaders get to see the northern border firsthand. Ilan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get started. We want to start talking about the Karish gas field, which Hezbollah targeted with a drone attack recently. I want you to give our folks an overview. First of all, what is the Karish gas field? Why is it strategically important for Israel? And what exactly happened in this Hezbollah attack?
So first, I will try to put it into context. There are a few details that I think that I know that today Israel can release, and we couldn't a few days ago. And I would say that the last incursion started actually not on Saturday, on the 2nd of July, but on Wednesday. On Wednesday, we had a drone, an unmanned aerial vehicle, probably without explosives in, that started to get the way from Lebanon, in the territorial water of Lebanon, into the area of the gas field. The decision that made in the Israel Defense Forces was to shoot it down. In that point, it was classified, and the decision that made was to let Hezbollah to observe the attack without responding it. The idea was not sticking a finger in the eyes of Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General. And to say that we thought that it's going to end by that, not exactly. Few things happened on the way that I cannot talk about, but then on the night of Friday, according to foreign sources, Israel attacked anti-aircraft systems, being by the area of the third support. That support, that part of it controlled by the Russians, and part of it controlled still by the Syrians. Those were different systems that maybe we're going to talk about after, and eventually they got destroyed. In the noon of the day after, on Saturday, we had three unmanned aerial vehicles that's starting to do the way from Lebanon through the economic water. We'll talk about those two terms, territorial water versus the economic water of the Mediterranean, water of Israel. And the direction was very clear. Again, getting to that gas field. The drones, those three, flew very low, hoping that they won't be detected by the Israeli radar system. And eventually, those three were shot down, two of them by destroyed ships and a missile that's called Barak, and one by an aircraft. From that point, Hezbollah started to publish. They were over the gas drill, flew right above, took pictures of exactly how Israel worked, the different ships around it, and for them concerned, that was a huge achievement. Israel claimed that that wasn't the situation. They were very far, they were shot down very far from that area, and whether Hezbollah accepted or not, it's a different question. In terms of operationally, that was a huge success for Israel. In terms of Hezbollah, we need to understand there was no plan to attack those areas, which means by shooting down those UAVs, we could indicate that there were no explosives on, which means that was only about sending a message. If Hezbollah wanted to shoot the area, they could use missiles being launched from Lebanon, and they could use army of drones, which means not 3, but 20, 30, or 40 of them in order to do it. They have that capability today.
So I want to make sure we're giving our folks the full picture. Let's take a step back. What is the Karish gas field? How big is it? How was it found? What's Israel's interest in this?
In terms of natural gas and Israel, many people in Israel said eventually Moses brought us to a land without any natural resources. And they were very frustrated, include me. I think that he just wanted to say, okay, you need to wait. And Israel waited. And in 99, we started to found it. And we found few gas fields in the Mediterranean. The one that we're talking about, the Karish, the shark, is about 60 miles from the Israeli shore. The amount of the gas there is pretty big. Now, once we're talking about the significance, the strategic significance, so first of all, I would say that the founders of this nation made a decision before the establishment of Israel that we will protect ourselves by ourselves. And I think that in order to protect ourselves, we need to have also our own energy, energetic independence. And that's something that we didn't have till recent. And then once we found it, we realized that now we won't lean on the support and eventually assistance or energy that we needed to buy from countries that part of them turned out to be our enemies after. Just remember that the main country that used to sell Israel oil and generally energy was Iran up to 1979. And of course, that today the situation is very different. And I think that now, in these days, when the war in Ukraine taking place, and we can see the strategic significance of Israel having an energy. Eventually, in all those drills that we have over there in the Mediterranean, we can manufacture, we can make electricity here or gas that is about 10% of the consumption of Europe. Europe that lean on the gas and based on the gas of Russia, it's about 40% of the gas that Europe consume came from Russia. Once the sanctions opposed on Russia, US offered to provide 10%, and Israel came and said, we can give you 10% more. And that's the amount of the gas that we have, which means they completely changed the strategic relationship that we have with the Europeans. Part of them are our closest partners. But I would say maybe even more important than that, it improved the relationship that we have with Egypt. Because eventually this gas pipe will go from Israel through Egypt and from Egypt by tankers to Europe. And that's a huge achievement that today Israel have economic relationship with the Egyptians, the fruit of peace, we can call them, and the cold peace that we had with Egypt since 1979 turned to be much warmer. And this is only one example, the strategic advantage that this thing eventually create here to this region and change the balance and the dynamic between the different countries.
Got it. No, thank you. So we know that there's a maritime dispute right now between Lebanon and Israel. What can you tell us about the dispute and what are the arguments that both sides are presenting?
The dispute, first of all, started on the 24th of May, 2000. Why then? I was then a young platoon commander in Lebanon, and we went out from Lebanon. And right after, the decision was to determine a border. So I won't say that this is exactly a border. Border, it's a boundary between two countries that recognize each other. And Lebanon not exactly recognized the existence of Israel. And still the decision was to mark on the map the border on the land. But no one talked about the sea because it was irrelevant then. No one talked about natural gas. No one talked about oil. These are things that we started to talk only a few years after. And the decision that eventually made after, once we found the gas, was to start to negotiate with the Lebanese. And the negotiation started 11 years ago. It's not something new. And US is the one that's trying to mediate. In the past 2 years, we started to see a few changes. Israel came and said, okay, first of all, we need to understand from where this line that will go west on the Mediterranean will start. And that's where the dispute began. Israel said that's going to be a tiny island being by an area that's called Nakura in the southern western part of Lebanon, right by the border, which means that the angle of that line from the border that we had in the land going to be 90 degrees. The Lebanese said, no, we will continue the line as it is. We won't start from that island, we're going to start from the top of an Israeli place that's called Rosh HaNikra. That's the way it started. And then Israel said, okay, so now the maritime border on the sea, we will make it in the north. We took a line that was pretty north. There are two gas fields over there. One of them called Elkanah, and that's something that's agreed by, I think, most of us, that that's in Lebanon. And the other one, that's the Karish, the shark, being in Israel. Or at least that's what we thought. At the beginning, when Israel drew that line partly crossed Elkanah. The Lebanese come and say, no, it won't work. Let's move that line a little bit further south. It wasn't exactly a little bit further south. We're talking about 330 square miles. That's the dispute area, further south, which means that all Elkanah going to be part of Lebanon. Israel said, you know what? This is line that we both call 23. Maybe that's something that we can agree on. And in the past 2 years, we started to talk about it. Amos Hochstein, the representative of US, almost managed to get to a compromise. And it felt finally we're doing that. But then the Lebanese decided to call to an expert committee that came and said, no, guys, it cannot work like that. We're moving now further south to a line that's called 29. And 29 is crossing the Karish gas field, which means that now we're moving further south and we demand a land that is free or sea area, which is 3 times bigger than the one we talked about 2 years ago. That's something that haven't done officially, but Hezbollah here jumped on the opportunity. And we found ourselves in kind of an end of negotiation when there's no one that we can talk with, even though we're still trying to sit on the table, around the table. And this is a question now, how this thing will solve. Because once Israel starting to drill over there and started eventually to let this gas flow, the Lebanese come in and say, hey, this is a problem. You're working in a land which controlled by us. So you brought the rat, the different gear over there to an Israeli land. We both agree on. But once you pump the gas from there, you also pump the gas from our area.
Right.
And this is the dispute today.
So, I mean, you mentioned that the negotiations are at a standstill. Is there any prospect for the U.S. mediation to have a breakthrough in the future, or do you really feel like this has kind of reached the end of the road? And also, is this something that is playing in Lebanon? Obviously, we know that Lebanon has a lot of political problems right now. Is this something that Lebanese are paying attention to?
First of all, definitely. You know, Lebanon now, a country that struggles for energy, a country that I will say more than that, not for the record, that eventually get gas from Israel. I think that today it's not a secret that as a result of the crisis and as a result of a way of US trying to help here, Israel getting our gas to Egypt by a gas pipe. It got into Jordan, from there into Syria. Syria will use part of that gas. The same Syrians that look at 3 miles from my border, and we have Hezbollah today along, and from there into Lebanon, which means that when Hassan Nasrallah turning the light on in his bunker, he probably used the gas that manufactured here on the other side of Israel. I live in the east side, so in the western side. So that's the situation. In terms of Lebanon here and the internal struggle that they have inside, Lebanon had struggles since ever, but this is now another reason to increase it. Eventually, we have people there in Lebanon that come in and say, guys, we're having a problem. We go to the Americans, we go to other countries, and eventually we ask for economic assistance. And they come in and say, guys, you have Elkanah, you have other gas fields. You can take care of your own economy. You can turn to be a rich country. But instead of it, you're fighting against Israel. And it's not something that's said only from outside of Lebanon. It's something that's said also from inside. And I will say that in closed room by Michel Aoun, the president of Lebanon, that eventually realized that on one hand, he's a good friend of Hezbollah. Some will say he's a completely proxy of Hezbollah. And he do what Hassan Nasrallah tell him. And Hassan Nasrallah is the practical president and not Aoun. And in the same time, you see that his son-in-law, Jubran Bazil, that want to be the Minister of Energy, come in and say, we having a problem here. Maybe let's compromise with Israel. Maybe let's go from line 29 and let's move back to line 23, which again, not necessarily agreed by Israel. But that's going to be a good start, which I think that we will have something to talk about. And you see internal struggles there in Lebanon of Hezbollah that come in to say, I do now what you are the politicians in Lebanon failed. I'm protecting the insurance of Lebanon. I'm making sure that all the gas will stay here and the Israelis won't take nothing from us. Once big part of the leadership of Lebanon come in and say, Hezbollah, with all the respect, we have been a problem. And now that's our opportunity to have an agreement with Israel and to start make our living. That's what called in Arabic, bidna naish. We want to live. And the big majority of Lebanon, that's what they want to do.
So let's talk about Nasrallah for a second. So the Hezbollah leader, he has made it very clear that he intends to prevent Karish from producing gas militarily. Obviously, this drone attack was, one example of that. How seriously do the Israelis take that threat? Do they feel that Nasrallah really will go to great lengths to attack Karish militarily? Or was this sort of a trial balloon, and now that Israel has sort of successfully defended it, is Nasrallah likely to back off?
Okay, so first of all, we need to understand how these things work. It's not that Nasrallah can make those decisions by himself. Eventually, Nasrallah built by Iran. Hezbollah built as a strategic tool by Iran. You won't use a strategic tool for a tactic matter. And this is eventually, from the Iranian perspective, is a tactic matter. And why we see that this front is much wider, because we see that in the same time that Hezbollah launching drones into Israel, and this is not the first one, and probably won't be the last. Only 3 months ago, we had an intelligent drone that crossed the sky of Lebanon into Israel, crossed the border to Israel, got to the Sea of Galilee, made a U-turn, and got back. Which means that that was another demonstration of Hezbollah. I have in drones, I have in unmanned aerial vehicles that manufacture in Kermanshah in Iran. And I was taught to use them. And I can use them against Israel. I will have strategic balance with Israel in terms of the Israeli air superiority. And it's not only by drones. In the past 2 years, we see a huge effort of Iran to arm Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hezbollah in Syria and other proxies in Syria. It can be Afghanis, can be Pakistanis, and can be Iraqis that they use over there by anti-aircraft systems and drones, which means that that attack that Israel supposedly had few hours before the UAV attack of Hezbollah on the last Saturday, that attack was on 2 systems that Iran tried to deliver Hezbollah in Syria and in Lebanon. One system, it's called Bavar 373. Bavar 373, I don't know if someone here heard, on the Russian anti-aircraft systems that call S-300. We talk a lot about it here in Israel. There was a concern that Russia provided those systems to Syria. Apparently, there's no need. Iran want to do it. That's the Iranian version. We're talking here about ranges of surface air missiles of about 200 miles. Besides that, there was another anti-aircraft system over there, and that was Khordad 3. The range is a little bit shorter, about 50 miles. In addition to that, Iran provides Hezbollah in Lebanon different movable systems that can move on tracks, and they can move from one place to the other, being pretty camouflaged. There are more simple systems that will try to shoot down the Israeli missiles, on the Israeli aircrafts. And that's all part of the overall strategy of the Iranians to build a war machine and to replicate the one that already succeeded by them to build in Lebanon, now also in Syria. Which means that if Hezbollah plan to do something like that, or attacking the Israeli gas field, or sending a message, he will call before that to someone there in Tehran to ask a permission. Maybe that someone from Tehran called him and said, just send them a message, but make sure that it won't escalate into a war. And that's the game that they have to pay. Of course, that it's a game with casualties. But that's the threat that we're facing now in the northern front. And today, once we talk about the Lebanese front, we have to connect it to the Syrian also.
Right. So, I mean, we've covered a lot of information. I have, just one last question, which is, we've talked so much about how important it would be for Israel in terms of their energy independence to get these gas fields online. What's left to get the Karish gas field operating in a timely manner?
So theoretically, it happened 4 months ago. That's when they're supposed to finish it.
Right.
And now they're planning to do it to the end of the year. Most of the delay is because of logistics of Energian, not necessarily because of Hezbollah and others. And I would say maybe completely not because of Hezbollah and the other security threats that we have. Right. Energian, which is a company that combines British and Greeks, having a delay here. We wait patiently. Meanwhile, we have the other drills further south in the territorial water of Israel. And we sign now on a contract with the Europeans. And we're talking here about a contract till 2050 of export oil into Europe. And that's something that will happen probably with Hezbollah or without.
All right. Thank you, Ilan. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for everything. And we'll look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you all for joining us for this conversation on the APAC app. We'll see you again soon.